Hello, everybody. Today's social studies lesson is going to be about slavery in the South. We're reading out of pages 124 and 125 in your packets, your social studies packets. I hope everyone had a good weekend. So let's get started. Okay, so as I said, today's topic is slavery in the South. Last week we left off on slavery in the North, and how we discussed some ways how it might be different in the South. So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail of how the institution of slavery was in the South. Okay, so slavery developed differently in the South than in the North. In the South, farmers grew tobacco or rice. Later, they grew cotton. These crops required many workers to tend, pick, and prepare the plants for shipping. Many Southern planters relied on enslaved Africans to do this work. Planters with large farms might purchase hundreds of enslaved people. In parts of the South, there were many more enslaved Africans than Europeans. So, I guess that's a bit of a surprise. There were people from Europe that were either indentured servants or slaves, but the majority of the people working on the plantations were from Africa. They were enslaved people from Africa. Enslaved Africans did more work in the fields. They brought special knowledge and skills from their African homes. And for example, some Africans knew about planting and growing rice. Because of their skills, rice became a huge cash crop in the Carolinas. The success of rice had bad results for many Africans, however. Rice plantations expanded, and their owners purchased many more enslaved Africans to work for them. So, unfortunately, because of their skills, planting rice, it made it more profitable. They made more money, the plantation owners, and it widened the institution of slavery. It made, it grew, which is a bad thing. That they had more slaves as time went on. So rice, like I said, rice plantations expanded, meaning they grew larger and more of them, and their owners purchased many more enslaved Africans to work for them, which is obviously bad. The way enslaved Africans lived in the South was very different from in the North. In the South, enslaved Africans often lived together in large communities. In many cases, they formed families. Their families provided support and happiness. However, they were also a source of pain because a family member could be sold at any time. It was common for slaveholders to separate husbands from wives and children from parents. So, people did have families. They tried to have some semblance of a normal life in community under these extremely difficult conditions, knowing that at any time their families could be separated from them. So there was this constant fear that your children could be taken away from you. Your loved ones could be taken away from you. If you were a husband and wife and you got married, which they really weren't allowed to do, but they did in secret. They could be split up. Just a lot of hardship. As you could see from the picture, plantation work was very hard. They worked them from sun up to sundown, and with very little breaks. Almost basically worked them to death in some cases. So, plantation life as a slave in the South was very difficult. Okay, so we're on page 125 now. Kind of going off of what I said, it says plantation life was hard on African American families. Still, enslaved people developed a rich culture. In plantation villages, people from different parts of Africa met and mixed. African words, food, and music blended with European languages and customs on plantations. The result would have long-lasting impact on American customs and music. What slaveholders feared, white slaveholders feared the growing slave culture. They often tried to crush it. For example, at times the playing of African music was outlawed in some places, meaning it wasn't allowed. Colonists felt that a united slave community would be strong and dangerous. They could not keep African Americans from forming a strong new culture, however. This culture helped support African Americans in difficult times. It also added to the way of life in the South. So the reason why plantation owners were scared of communities coming together, they were scared of them rebelling. And we talked a little bit about that last week. Standing up to slave owners and running away. They didn't want any sort of organized community. But in despite of this, they still, slaves still found a way to communicate and get together, play traditional African music, and have some sort of, like I said, a little bit of a normal life, as much as they could. As difficult as that was to do, they still, held on to whatever customs and traditions they knew of, and like they said, and different people from different parts of Africa mixed and met and enriched the culture even more. Okay, so for number 3, it says, explain why a rice plantation in the South might require many workers and why many enslaved Africans were used for this work. So we read it and I talked about it. Why do you think they would require many workers on a rice plantation? Remember, plantation is a large farm, okay? So these weren't small farms that, you just, get milk from cows or something. These were acres and acres of farmland and crops. If you compare it today to like a large commercialized farm where they sell to Stop and Shop and ShopRite and all those type of stores, produce. We have machines that do that today, but back then they relied on slave labor. And then why were enslaved Africans used for work as opposed to why couldn't they hire? What would be the advantage of having a slave as opposed to hiring someone and paying them? Okay, think about that in terms of the plantation owner. Why would they want to have slaves instead of paid workers? Okay, what's the advantage to that? Okay, and then we'll talk about this more on Wednesday. Okay, I'm going to start having Zoom sessions starting tomorrow. I'm going to contact your parents, and we're going to try to do some group lessons with science and then social studies on Wednesday. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching. Okay.